Hi guys, this is Rai Gutierrez, the CEO and co-founder of Tier 1 Entertainment, and with me today is a prominent guy in a lot of spaces, but I think I would let him introduce himself. But for me, I'm just excited to just talk, discuss, and basically just have a conversation with someone of his caliber, and for that reason, I'm super excited. So let's go. Hi Thomas, what's up? Can you introduce yourself to the audience? Don't worry, this is the only formal part. For the rest, it's gonna be just a conversation.
Fantastic. Yes. Hi, I'm Thomas. I am a game maker, producer, animation producer, investor, tech investor. I've traveled the world, seen a lot of things. Climbed Kilimanjaro, chased Templars in Portugal. I've traveled in many places, and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, but is it your first time in the Philippines or no?
This is my first time in the Philippines.
Oh wow, you haven't traveled the world if you haven't been in the Philippines.
Actually, technically, it's my second time in the Philippines.
Ah, yeah?
Yeah. My first time I actually came to the Philippines to come to the United States after leaving Vietnam.
Actually, that's what I heard, right? Like maybe we can start with your story so that at least people understand, where did you start? How did you get to your point, right? And I think one thing that you mentioned to me was you actually were from Vietnam. So it's very close to the Philippines and a lot of people can really resonate to that, right? So what's your story? Like, how did you get to the States? What's the...
Yeah, I was born in the late 70s. This is like maybe 4 years after the war.
Okay.
And my parents, this is a lot of people were trying to escape from Vietnam. And I think the story is actually fascinating because usually they don't take kids. It's a gnarly trip because you have to go by boat. And about something like 700,000 people died on that trip. And so it was like a little bit of a death sentence. Like if you win, it's 70% non-success rate. And so, but my parents were really adamant that we were gonna go.
Okay.
And so we ended up going, and it was a gnarly journey. But effectively, they were stranded out in the ocean for 6 days, and no water, no food. People were dying left and right, and somehow we ended up we ran into a Thai oil tanker, and there was an American serviceman on the oil tanker who took us aboard and ended up as a refugee in a refugee camp in Thailand. And so I lived in Thailand for 8 months. My mom was pregnant during that trip, and so my sister was born in Thailand.
Okay.
We ended up after 8 months going to the Philippines. So I lived in the Philippines for a while.
Okay.
And then we went to the United States. Yeah.
So that was the last time you've been in the Philippines,
Yeah.
and then you went to the United States.
Exactly.
You mentioned you were there when you were 5, and then
Yes.
basically from there, that's how your story started.
Pretty much, yeah. It was like a crazy, I would say a crazy like early life adventure. I actually feel like I lived a bunch of lives at this point. And so, but it's so early that I don't have a lot of memories of it. But they say that when the Jesuits, they used to say like, give me the boy for 7 years and I'll show you the man. It's somehow probably is a big part of who I am and how I think about the world, like subconsciously.
100%. I think, even when you just hear the story, even if you don't fully remember it, it gives you a picture of how you grew up and the challenges that you needed to go through for you to get to your position. And I think that will really hit on a certain core internally, right?
Yeah. I always felt like I was a child between worlds, both from the East and the West. Obviously, I grew a lot of my career and what I've done is in the West, but a lot of the products that I've built or worked on ended up being very global, and so that perspective of a global mindset of both East and West, I call it the yin to the yang, has actually really been beneficial for me.
Yeah, so let's move on to your US story. So what is your US story like after you got in there? Like what basically happened and how did you get into Riot and all of these things that happened in your life?
Yeah, so we grew up really poor in the US. I remember first 12 years of my life I lived in other people's garages. And so my parents didn't have a lot of money, and they said, hey, we don't like you watching TV, which is probably a good thing because TV is a lot of programming, but you can play whatever video games you want as long as you got straight A's. So they bought me an Atari 2600.
Okay.
Uniquely, I think my life has been largely impacted by my game experience, and which is really strange because I'm ultimately making Arcane. I grew up watching television and films like really late in my career, in my life. Like I think I saw Star Wars for the first time when I was 23, which is a very strange experience, but what's really unique, and we can get back to that, but I grew up playing games like Yar's Revenge and Joust, and like I played everything, and we were so poor that we couldn't afford the consoles, the console, like the cartridges.
Yes.
And so in the US we have something called Blockbuster. I don't know if you had it.
You can borrow like
Yeah,
cartridges.
you can rent. Yeah.
But we don't have that. We don't have that.
So but it's essentially you can rent. This is pre Netflix, but essentially you can rent these cartridges, and what I did was on the weekends I would rent these cartridges and play, and I got really good at beating games very quickly. So it's kind of like an early form of esports in a way, but it's just me against me, right? But it allowed me to get through a lot of games, and so I have this. I think my generation is strange because because we started playing games from the very beginning of games. We have like this deep history of what gaming was and what it was going to become. So I saw how gaming changed over time, from going from arcades like coin up to consoles to all the different kinds of game experience, from mastery games to nurturing games to to PvP to online games, but I ended up going to university studying the hard sciences. I did
You mentioned neuroscience, right?
I did neuroscience and bioengineering, and
what was the reason for that? Like, why take that up in the first place? Like, I'm not against it, it's just that it's not common to find someone who takes that up.
Yeah, my parents were like, you're gonna be a doctor.
Okay.
I ended up doing well in school, so I was a salutatorian at my school.
Oh, wow.
And I, again, to that same thing I mentioned, like I'm a child between worlds. I was on the football team. I was like actually the only, maybe one of two Asian kids on the football team.
And probably the only neuroscience student there.
But this is in high school. And then, but I was also in decathlon and all these academic, GATE programs and honors programs. And so I was always between these different communities, and that actually gave me a lot of different unique perspectives.
For sure.
Going to university, I ended up working for a woman named Sally Rye, and she was the first female astronaut, and so I worked on
female astronaut.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I worked on this really cool program called EarthCam, and it was in combination with NASA, essentially. And so it was cool because it was set up as a mission control, and I got to work with ISS, the space station that flew across. And it was during the Afghan war. This is back in 98, 99. And so we got coordinates from everyone from government agencies. And so I was taking pictures. I was talking to astronauts to take pictures of the Earth. What's really strange was I have a Google device, and I was watching just like these images come across. When you just let it go idle, you'll see these images come across the screen, and I was like, "Whoa, those are my images!" So they're like using the images that I did in college. So I was like actually pretty happy. But the way I got into the game industry is actually very, very strange. I was on the path to go in pre-med and become a doctor.
Yes.
And I was going to end up. I had this internship that I was going to do at Microsoft that year, and so it was my last year. And I had this art minor. I never show up to this class. Like, it was like a very easy class. I was really good at Flash, and during that time I was programming Flash like crazy. And
so for those who don't know Flash is basically a technology that allows you to create a video that's not a video.
Exactly.
That's the best way to explain it.
And it's no longer around.
It's no longer around. But it's what Flash is.
Yeah. And this guy, his name was Sean Beatty, and he was the son of, I think he's like related to the provost in some way. And he was doing a talk, and afterwards, all my friends left, and I said, "Hey, I'm gonna pitch this guy a game." So I went up to him. I pitched him a game where you took genetic engineering and you combined it with Magic: The Gathering, which is one of my favorite games.
Okay.
And he was like, "That's such a cool idea. You should come and talk to us, do an interview." So they set up a 30-minute interview, and after that 30-minute interview, they're like, "We want you to be one of the first intern classes for electronic arts."
Okay.
So I ended up joining Max's studio as an intern. Max's at that point was run by a guy named Will Wright. He's a very famous designer. He made The Sims and SimCity.
Yes, yes.
And his studio just got bought by EA. And so I came on and I was working on a game called Simsville, which is, if The Sims is like very close, like you're controlling a family, and SimCity is
it's like an MMO version.
Yeah. SimCity is high up where you're like a mayor. Simsville is like right in between where you're controlling a town. I was so in love with the game. I was like this kid, and again, it didn't pay as well as other interns, but I somehow got to live my dreams, and I realized at that point.
So what part of the game did you actually work on?
So I was an assistant producer
during
that time, and so I worked on, I was working on assets, like I was working on like things to put into the game.
So like the buildings and like the roads,
the characters, all that. Yeah. But what's unique about what happened was, I really believe in this idea that like whatever is in your heart, whatever's in your subconsciousness, your desire, your devotion, and I was so devoted to games. Like in college, I would miss like midterms and finals because I was playing StarCraft. I was playing so much StarCraft, Diablo 2. I was playing so many games, and somehow like the universe, God was like, you should be in games somehow, and that path was carved into my destiny to get into the game industry.
Yeah, I think that's really quite a story. I think just to dissect, like some of the things that you've said. During our time, like when we were younger, like gaming and sports weren't really meshed together a lot. Right, like I was growing up during that time as well, right? So you don't really find a lot of people who played sports and games at the same time. So I feel like that really gave you a very unique kind of like a development from an EQ perspective and at the same time from an IQ perspective. I'm a firm believer that if you have been playing games at a younger age, I think that the way you solve problems and the way you think critically is just different from every other people because you're technically in front of multiple problems every day and reading a lot of instructions every day and following those instructions, reading into game facts and all of these things, so I think generally that develop you differently. But what I'm really interested in is that how are you as creative as you are and at the same time being as logical as you are as well? Just because you mentioned you are in investments, you are technically like sitting in the board of like different like companies, while being able to appreciate the creative that comes with the game.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we can like deep dive into that. So after like EA, what happened?
Yeah. No. So at EA, I was I built games like The Sims, worked on games like The Sims, worked on SimCity, all these different expansion packs, and then ended up working on a game called Spore. And then after Spore, they gave me my own team, and I built I was building a game. Nobody will remember this game, but it was a free-to-play game, and at that point, it was like right at that moment where. So there's many transitions that happen in the game industry, and we can talk about these patterns. And over time, if you look at in the long term, you see a lot of these patterns, and it actually will relate to what we're talking about later. Because you think about just going back a little bit, like in the U.S., games started as coin up games, right? Like you pay quarters in an arcade and you play a game, and it's all leaderboards and mastery.
Yeah, that was basically your version of a computer cafe or PC banks here in Asia, right?
Exactly. And then, but it took Japan to come out with games that had IP, So Japan came up with Mario.
Yes.
Japan came up with Zelda, Street Fighter. These icons are now forever in our subconsciousness, globally, right? And then it took the South Koreans to really come up with free to play. So during some of these transitions, like when we were making Spore, we had this. The transition was going towards DRM, which is digital games where you can just download.
Yep.
And everybody was like losing their minds over this transition because people were just like, well, I want to buy and own my copy. I don't want to but at the same time, so Spore took a huge hit because people weren't used to that new model.
Yes.
Now it's so normal. Like you just download games on Steam. You just download the game, right? It's DRM is actually a very normal thing now. In the game I was building out after
was
Spore,
free to play.
Was free to play, and people are losing their minds. Actually, the company EA was losing their minds. They're like, we don't even know what this free to play thing is, And at the same time, there was this little company that was cropping up called Riot Games, and they had this new free-to-play model. You know, the first free-to-play game really in the U.S. was like MapleStory. It came from Nexon, right? And then I think Zynga did a bunch of free-to-play games like Farmville, but it was not a well-known, and people kind of like disparaged it like crazy because new models are always challenged,
and those are mostly casual. You know?
Exactly. And so I wanted to build an ARPG that was free to play, but at the very last minute they switched it to a box. And you know, when you design a free to play game, you can't switch it to a box.
It's gonna change a lot of things.
And it really discouraged me. I was like, this is not. I'm not very happy with this change. And so during that time, I ended up meeting up with. I was playing a lot of World of Warcraft, and then I ended up transitioning over to League of Legends, and this is like during beta. I was like first 100 people playing this game, right? Yeah. And I ended up meeting the Riot guys. I met Brandon and Brandon Beck, and I was blown away by how out of the box he was thinking. You know, we went to GDC, which is called Games Developers Conference in the US, and this is where all the developers come in. There's all these parties at GDC, and I went to the Riot party, and everybody was on PCs playing.
Okay.
Like, I've never seen a party where people are just, playing the game. This is nuts, right? And we just became really fast friends, and then I ended up joining Riot.
Okay.
After that, I left. I was like exec at EA, and I think I was one of the youngest execs at EA. And what's wild was, my mom, she was like, "Wait, you're gonna leave a stable job for a startup?" She's like,
because during that time Riot was still a startup. Okay.
So, still really small. I joined when Riot was maybe like 300 people. League of Legends was 80 something people.
So let's put a pause on that first, because I think one thing that you got into in terms of your story is something that I want to discuss. Like the box model and free to play. Like, I don't think a lot of people see how that has really evolved the whole gaming industry a lot. So I mean, just to share my thoughts on that, right? One of the persons that I really look up to is Jan Silgers, who happened to be one of the board members of Tier 1 Entertainment, just because he was technically one of the innovators of the esports space by being able to, create ESL and a lot of the things that he did before that. And I remember in one of the YouTube videos that I watched, just because, just to share you my story as well, from my end, it was like, I'm from the Philippines. I see esports happening in different parts of Asia with an advertising model, and here in the Philippines it was non-existent, right? So for me, like, why is this happening? How can I build the industry? Where do I start? Like, all of those things were what's in my mind during the time, and this was around 2005, 2010, like somewhere around that time. And I can clearly remember that video in which Jens specifically mentioned that one of the reasons why esports came to play and became possible was because of the shift from the box business model to the free-to-play business model. Because just to, explain it a little bit more, during the old days, the general business model of games was you create game A, game B, game C, game D, and game A would be sold out, and then you go to B, to C, to D. So that basically means that for all the development that you do, you need to be able to go all in from A to Z in terms of a story, to A to B to C to D. Yeah. So the general conclusion there in terms of a business model is there wasn't an importance on retention. Games didn't need to retain the players in the game because they wanted them to buy the next one.
Yeah, they actually are incentivized not to retain the players.
Yes, they didn't want to retain the players at all. Instead, they want them to move on to the next one. Yeah. So when free to play was introduced, then people were like, how do we keep them in?
Yeah.
Because you want to keep them in because the business model became, we let you play the game for freely, but we will earn from the microtransactions that are then sold in the game, right? Yeah. And I think this has really changed the gaming industry a whole lot, not just in terms of a perspective and business model, but also in terms of revenues, because people eventually figured out that selling box A to a single to a single person, box B, C, and D, what are the chances of hitting like 4 straight home runs versus you hit 1 straight home run and you basically just introduce multiple microtransactions in the game and keep them in it.
Yeah.
So if people are following, basically the whole narrative and the whole landscape shifted from that change. And I want to hear your thoughts on that. Like, obviously, today, like what you said, it's normal. But what was free-to-play like?
Yeah.
From a perspective of someone who was doing all the box models before.
Yeah. It was the industry did not like it.
Yeah? Why? Like, what were the headspace?
The first taste of it was games like Farmville, and people were like, "That's not really a game," you know. And you had and people were, and just to give a little bit of context on why free to play, in places like Korea, where people grew up I think during the early years of Korea, people didn't have a ton of money, right? And so buying a console and buying like a $200, $300 console, and then console games were expensive. Like $60 games were really expensive, $50 games were really expensive, and so people were okay to try something for free, like almost like a beta, and they fall in love with it. They pay for it. And in many ways, the free to play model is the most equitable version of because
it democratized gaming.
Exactly.
Basically, right? Like, there is no barrier to entry. Everybody can just come in, see what it's like, and then whatever happens.
And then in places like China, where there was a time where the government banned console games. And so it allowed for PC games and mobile games and free-to-play games to really flourish. And it's the same thing. And by the way, back then too, it's like people were pirating games like crazy. PC games like crazy. And so if you were on PC, you're likely going to get pirated because, again, these countries couldn't afford the normal gamer couldn't afford a $50 game.
That's true.
And so, but the free-to-play now is 70% of game revenues. It's massive. And the reason why I think it's also super popular is that, I kind of describe it because some people ask me, like, for League of Legends, people will buy cosmetics, right? And when you buy cosmetics, people are like, wait, you're buying outfits for your characters in the game? Like, why would anybody do that, right? And I kind of describe it like this. Do you have a pet? Do you have a dog or a cat? Yeah?
Yeah.
If you have a dog or a cat, you are in love with that animal. And you would spend an infinite amount of money, like probably thousands of dollars on your dog or cat or dressing them up and whatnot. It's the same way. It's any hobby that you're deeply devoted to or in love with, you're going to spend time because what it's giving you is way more value than whatever you're putting in.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, the way I see it is, it's like generally presentation and marketing, right? Like, I feel like, especially when talking to a lot of people, some people don't see the value of like being able to present themselves properly, or whether it's being able to present themselves properly or not. Maybe it's simply about how do you want to look, right? And people invest in that. Like, look at the fashion industry, look at like the difference in terms of what cars you buy. All of this, like decisions change your optics as a person. And like being able to put, like figuratively your persona into a game, and that in-game character is technically an extension of you. So that means that for whatever that character looks like, that represents you.
Exactly.
And we actually spend more on other things that represent us, whether it's our house, the furniture's in it, like our clothing, all of the things that come with the way you present or express yourself, right? For me, it's not purely about marketing and optics, it's about self-expression. Is how I see it.
I think you're totally right. And there's a great quote from Shakespeare, and the quote is
we're getting Coke.
Fantastic.
Coke quickly.
Game.
One more. Can we not see the Coke on screen?
Okay lang.
Oh,
it's fine.
okay.
One more for you.
No, it's fine. Coke on screen's fine.
Alright. James here is gonna cover just in case everything. Okay. Hold. Ready? Wait till I go up.
I put it on the ground.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. So you were saying Shakespeare.
Yeah, Shakespeare has a great quote, and the quote is, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women are merely players, and in their time, every man plays many different roles." Because we, as humans, we play different roles. I am an executive at a game company, or I am a investor, or I am a father to 2 young daughters, and I'm a husband to, like, each role I'm actually a different person.
Yes.
So we have different identities, and in game, you know, you can now fantasy fulfill yourself to be like an orc in World of Warcraft. You know, I played World of Warcraft. I was a character called Ape-Dog, and this is back in vanilla days where, oh my gosh, like they didn't have the cross server stuff, you know, and so you can be really famous on these servers.
Yes.
You know, you show up and then everyone's like, "Yo, Ape-Dog," and
Yeah.
people lose their minds, right? And so this is, to me, like this is just part of the human experience, you know.
Yeah.
And I think gaming really allows for you to play those roles, play those characters that you normally couldn't, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's something that I want to add, right? I truly believe that real innovation in a capitalism world is always based off a development or an evolution in business models, right? Just because if the business model doesn't evolve and follow through in terms of what you want to be able to do, then you won't have enough capital to be able to sustain what you're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I'm just too, like capitalist of a mindset, but I truly believe that just because I've seen dreams fail without the capital that can support it, you know. Yeah. So that's the reason why I feel like it's very important to have the right business model attached to, like a certain vision or a certain dream. And also, like as a CEO, probably that's the reason why I'm operating and thinking like that already, right? So in line with that, coming from the box model into a free-to-play model, I think what it also changed from an experiential standpoint is it became social. Right? Because with all the games that were sold on boxes, at the most, even with a multi-top, you can probably play 8 people in a game. It'll probably like fit in 8 people in a game, right? Yeah. But once it became online and once, like free to play came into play, then that's when it became social, right? And I think for those who never understood, like cosmetics or anything digital items that you buy for that matter, it's basically a society and a community that exists within a certain realm or like a platform, and there are a lot of politics and interactions that happen there, and every purchase of a cosmetic like changes a lot of things. And I can share with you this really funny story in our company when we're just talking about generally like about our experiences in games and whatnot. And one of our VPs of today has a kid that actually plays Minecraft. So when she started out playing Minecraft, she realized that a lot of the other kids have actually like great cosmetics. So she then eventually figured out and learned how to get her dad's credit card, purchase one of the most expensive houses, and like my VP was like, "Hey, like what's this line of a credit card? It's so expensive." It was like, "Why did I buy a house in Minecraft?" And like he had to like talk to the kid and say, "Hey, what did you buy?" And she was like trying to explain that everybody else had this house and this toy and this pet and was like that, and I had to purchase a house. So eventually, like that was kind of like a story. And imagine what I'm saying from this is that imagine as a kid, you have that certain psyche of, I kind of like want to show that I have this to the rest of my friends.
Yeah.
And I feel like everybody has that, right? So generally, I guess like in line with what we're talking about in terms of purchasing stuff, that's just it.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of it is, especially for that story, everybody has to go through those lessons, you know. And in many ways, games allows you to go through lessons without the necessary catastrophic consequences.
Yes.
You know, which I really like. But back to your question about like, how do you balance? You asked an earlier question.
Creativity about and logic.
Yeah. You know, to me, that is the eternal struggle. With the yin and the yang, you know, like this is a very Eastern concept, and I've really embraced it as I've gotten older, which is this idea that there's these two kind of parts of yourself that's always battling, you know. There's the mind and there's the heart. And the mind is a very logical creature, right? It's constantly like giving you thoughts, it's constantly wanting things, it's constantly justifying things, you know. While the heart is just pure creativity, you know. The heart is like where artists live. And so for me, it took me a while because, like my background being like engineering and neuroscience, but my work is mainly in the creative field. Being able to oscillate between the two and use whichever one that's necessary at the time is great. So for me, I got to a place where I'm almost never thinking. and I only use my mind when I need to move mountains. It's mostly always hard.
Interesting.
You know, and I kind of like use that as a way. You know, you ever watch athletes and they talk about this flow state, and when they're in flow states, they seem like they can't miss a basket. You know, Kobe Bryant scored 82 points.
It's like a zone,
yeah,
right?
they're in the zone, right? And they're always at the end. They're always like they're playing like they're out of their minds because they're truly out of their minds. They're just instinctual. It's like watching. You never hear those stories of like a woman like picks up a car to save her baby.
Yes.
Like, these stories are crazy.
Yes.
And you realize
it's all reflex.
Yeah, it's all instinct. It's no mind at that point. And when they're out of their minds, they can do unlimited things. They're like superhuman. But you know, in our society, we've been programmed so much in the mind that it's constantly the mind is like kind of like a stained glass window. It's filtering everything that goes into us. And so for me, I spent a lot of time traveling the world, and I come to the realization that if I'm not in my mind and I'm purely in my heart,
wow,
it's pure instinctual, and the flow state is constant. So the human being has, I would say, fleeting moments, like very fleeting moments where they feel the zone. They feel like in the zone.
This is super interesting. You know, like why this is interesting to me is because for the first, you know, like part of our conversation, it was you as a human being, you know, like talking to me about how you grew up, you know, like how you became you. But in this part, I feel like it's the neuroscience student talking. Because you really like articulated it in a very, very different way from the way I've heard it before.
Yeah. And honestly, if you think about like, so but I think that's the default human state. We just forgot how to tap it. And so I think the default human state is superhuman.
That's actually super interesting to me. So for me, like I really like philosophy also, and like looking into like a lot of stuff too. But you know, like this is my personal theory. It might be true, it might not be true. But the way I think about, you know, like creativity and logic it's the left brain and right brain, right? I feel like they are two different species, in my opinion. Like they are just two different species, but it doesn't mean that one can tap the other. That's kind of like how I see it. So if you are creative, you can tap logic, but you're technically more creative. And if you are logical, then you can tap creativity. You know, like and any other way around. I mean, you can always increase your effort and your brain power to be able to tap both. Yeah. But the difference, though, in my opinion, is the wiring. So hear me out. So my thought, just like what you kind of like articulated with the heart and the mind, is different. I think that if you are a creative person, you don't technically. So let me start with the logical first. I feel like with logical people, they operate like an engine. Their wiring is more of like an engine. You know, they need their gasoline, whether it's sleep, eat, or whatever. Routines are part of their gasoline. The more they do their routines, they get more energized. And once they switch it on, it's on. And then once it's done, they turn it off. So in a way, it operates like an engine because whether it's routines, it's food, it's whatever energy that needs to be recharged, they can turn it on and they can turn it off anytime. And I think that's why I see a lot of, you know, like logical people operate, you know, like fluidly in constant routines and in very like routinary roles and flourish in that role, in my opinion, right? While a creative, for me, operates differently. Yeah. For me, I'm a creative and I can't turn it on just because. You know, like I can't turn it on at 8 a.m., function to 5, and then get the most out of my day.
Yeah.
I feel like the way we operate, at least from my perspective, is that we're like a balloon. So if you are a creative, your balloon or the air is technically only injected when you are inspired. So when you see like an art piece, or you see like a really great creation, a good looking, you know, like aesthetic, it pumps you. Whatever inspires you pumps you. And the more air comes into your balloon, as you put out an output or something of some sort, it reduces the balloon's air. So I think the challenge is, as a creative, for you to constantly work, you need to be able to figure out what inspires you, what charges you up, how much of that air is put out for every output that you make. and having that self-awareness of an understanding of how do you recharge the balloon at the same as much as possible is, I think, it's important. I mean, just to share with you a thought, right? Like, for example, for writers who are very, very like creative, right? Sometimes they write a book, they rest for 1 year. You know what I mean? Because all of the air in the balloon is already out. So they need to be able to find the inspiration to fill that balloon up again and basically like put another, like output out. So I guess for me, like being able to understand from a self-awareness perspective, at least this is my interpretation on how you function and how you manage your energy, is basically what makes you superhuman in the word that you say. Just because life is a marathon, in my opinion. And, you can always have like 2-3 masterpieces that may come out. But for me, like the ones who truly succeed in the end are the ones who are capable of recharging, creating a masterpiece, knowing how to recharge again and create a masterpiece again, and being able to like take life as a marathon, really. So that's kind of like how I see it in terms of that creativity and logic kind of like thing.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting perspective. Definitely there's like a pacing to it. And I do believe that the idea of being superhuman is if you think about and in many ways, like society today has convinced everyone that specialization is the way to go. That's why everybody's like, you're the foot doctor or you're the heart doctor. But the ancients, if you go back, they have this concept called polymaths, right? And the polymaths of the ancient days, like, look at Da Vinci, right? Da Vinci was drawing helicopters. He was like composing music. He was doing all kinds of stuff. And you look at his works and you're like, holy cow, this is like a genius level human that was doing things across so many dimensions.
Both a generalist and a specialist, basically.
Yes, both deep and wide. And all the value honestly is found between the gaps. And if you think about like, you go, and again, you can look at Aristotle, you look at Plato, you look at Socrates, you look at all the great philosophers. There's their ability to go between many different fields, being experts in music, physics, geometry, philosophy. It's uncanny, right? And in the modern days, you don't see very much of that.
Maybe it's because of the deepness in terms of their understanding of their psyche and their self.
Well, in many ways, the way you're seeing it right now is like, and I think the next generation you're going to see more, like it's like an Elon Musk, right?
Yes.
Like, how is a guy building rockets and building Teslas and building robots and Neuralink and, burrowing tunnels under the, like, this is I think because, and I actually believe gaming is actually one of the areas that allows for that to unlock.
Yes.
Because it allows you to experience so many repetitions. Back in the day, if you were a caveman, you might go out and kill the saber-tooth tiger and get good at killing saber-tooth tigers for food, right? But if you die, you die. Yes. But here, with games, you can do that 1,000 times, right? And you get really good at that. And so in the future, you're seeing like the best pilots come from games. The best there was that movie, like the best race car drivers, right?
Yeah.
Like the Gran Turismo movie. It's like literally from a guy who drove a game.
Ender's
simulator.
Game was like that too, right?
Exactly. So I think the future is gonna look a lot like this. But to your point around like, my perspective on the idea of like recharging, I really believe in this idea that all of us are meant for some things, in the same way a bird is meant to fly. It's birthright. It's meant to fly. But most of humanity has been convinced that they need to be something else. So we have infinite number of people who are birds that want to swim, and they struggle and they suffer and they try super hard, and at the end of the day, they may succeed as a swimmer, but they end up not being fulfilled or satisfied.
So what you're saying is like you feel like every human has a certain DNA. And a wiring that they need to be able to follow, but because society dictated otherwise, they're actually chasing something else.
Exactly. When they're a kid, they were said that they were told that their mom told them something, or their dad told them something, or their religious institution told them something, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, I gotta go do that. In the same way, I think I was very fortunate because I was always meant to make games. My parents are like, you should be a doctor, but I knew if I became a doctor, I would be maybe miserable or suffer.
That's true.
And it wouldn't feel natural. Like birds naturally fly. They can fly forever without feeling tired. They're energized. So we are full of, like, the world's full of birds that wanna swim and fish that wanna fly.
Yeah, so I guess, like, before we get into, like, your story on Riot, here's what I want to understand, right? Like, I get this a lot in the comments of my vlog, that I was really fortunate to have found my passion and my DNA in a way, and that basically purpose of who I am, right? But to those who are listening, what would be your advice in trying to understand, or even eventually understand, what's your purpose?
Oh, that's such a deep question.
For you, how did you know it?
Since I was 14, I oscillated out of full consciousness to unconscious. Like, I oscillated constantly, and sometimes I gained this, like, really deep clarity. And interesting, when I was, I'll tell you a really quick story, and it comes down to limiting beliefs for me. I'm an immigrant, right? So I came on a boat to the U.S. and one day I was thinking, I'm like, if my parents were astronauts, then there's no reason why I wouldn't be an astronaut. It would just be in the cards.
Yes.
And I'm like, the only reason why I didn't think I was going to be an astronaut was because my parents weren't astronauts. And so I really flipped the script on my subconsciousness. And so when somebody asks me, because I've done so many different various things in my career, whenever anybody said to me, like, you haven't done something, I always say, I haven't done it yet. And just that simple yet allowed me to be like, it's just a limiting belief. Like the idea of an astronaut, like, I actually said I was going to work for, like, NASA at some point, because I was fascinated with space, and I ended up working for Sally Rye, and then I in my mind, when I was a kid, I said I was going to build video games, and I ended up building video games. And I said I was going to go build TV shows and movies, and I ended up building, like, something like Arcane, right? And so to me, like, my advice to people is that the first thing is to realize that your thoughts are not yours. You have to get out of your thoughts, because your thoughts will, your mind is like its only job is to think, and its only job is to get your attention. It doesn't know what's right or wrong, truth or false. It just needs to have your attention. And the thing with your thoughts are that it's constantly, like, and the moment you realize that your thoughts are like something else that you need to extrapolate or extract yourself from, it convinces you that some technique is going to do that. So it's so cunning. It already knows ahead of time where to go. And so it's constantly just, like, in your ear, talking to you, chattering so much that it's almost like background noise where you don't even hear it anymore, and you think it's you. Because that thing is not you. Not only is not you, it's gonna actually tell you all the wrong things to do, because it just wants you to follow its, like, its cue. So get into your heart, and once you do that, like, your heart is so pure. Your heart, it can never lie to you. When you were a kid, you were told a couple of things. You were told, follow your heart, or home is where the heart is, or it's a work of heart. It's a work of art, right? Or they would say things like, you would go look for a treasure chest. Where's the treasure chest? Well, in the chest.
Oh,
right.
I never heard about that.
It's like this, like, collective consciousness telling you how to find where your path should be. But we just get in here constantly, and we're like, well, my mom told me I should be a doctor. Well, and I was very fortunate to, like, do the thing that I was, like, deeply passionate about, even though there wasn't, like, a big industry around it. Now it is, right? Now it's huge. And you found your path, which is amazing. Like, you're doing fantastic. But when you find that path, it's people will show up, and the universe will conspire to make it happen for you. It will feel natural, like birds flying. There's like
I actually feel the same way.
Yeah,
I can agree to that. I mean, it's hard to articulate in the words that you've kind of, like, explained on how you found it. But basically, maybe the answer to that is because we weren't thinking when we chose it.
Yeah.
Right?
It was purely a love of it. It was purely passion. And all the signs were telling you not to. right? There were so many
Yes.
guys who were like, "What are you doing? You're crazy."
Yes.
Because when you do the thing that you're meant to do, it has to be. You ever heard of Hero's Journey from Joseph Campbell?
No.
It's a fantastic book. It's a book it's called The Monomyth, and it's really the story of our lives. So almost every movie that are, like The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings or Star Wars is based on this hero's journey. And the hero always starts in the status quo. And the status quo is like your village. It's your normacy. But the hero at some point has to get out of the village to go on the quest, right?
Yes.
But when they do that, there's a bajillion things telling them not to. And the hero will almost always deny the quest to start. They will always say no to the quest. And that's usually the fear that comes in, which is like, I'm comfortable right now. I don't need to go out there to do the thing. But what you realize that by being uncomfortable and going out there, that's where the treasure is. That's where you're gonna meet the master, learn, grow, fight the dragon, and whatnot. And so
actually, I think that's a very interesting point of view. First of all, I've never heard of the concept of the heart and the mind different from each other, the way you have told it to me. I've never read that before. And I think what's interesting as you've been talking about all this is that, now that I think about it, most of the things that I did prior to where I am weren't logical, right?
Yeah.
And if you let your brain technically decide on things, and look into the data that were available, most likely I would not have I wouldn't be here, right? So I think it's very, very important to kind of understand that, at the end of the day, wait, can we? Sorry. Sorry, again. 1, 2, 3, go. Yeah, that at the end of the day, if you think about it, if you're thinking you're never gonna be uncomfortable, you're not gonna change the things that are not logically possible, and if the brain was technically the one that's ruling the world, no innovation will truly happen.
Exactly.
Right?
Because all art comes from the heart. This is why, even the word art and heart sound very similar, right? If you think about if you look at Einstein when he said he discovered E equals MC square, or you look at Beethoven writing Ninth Symphony, you look at Tesla, they all said that it came from another place. It didn't come from here. It came from here.
Yes.
And what's amazing is I have this saying, which is like factories can't make art. Factories can only, factories make McDonald's, right?
Yes.
It's factories can only take what's in your mind and reconstruct it. But it can never come up with something new. And art is always inherently something new, something fresh, something interesting. And the mind is a box is contained. And so to get out of that containment, to get into the heart, that's when something new comes into being.
Yeah. For me, I would probably explain it as a creative energy of some sort that gets transferred from the creator to eventually the person who's looking at it, right? Because I know that whether you're listening to music or looking at an art piece, there seems to be this invisible energy that flows through.
You're speaking my language.
Yeah, that's really something that I was never able to explain, but I know that it exists, right?
No, it's 100% existence. When I was building all these games, sometimes I meet people and they're miserable building the games, and I always wondered, I'm like,
the ones who are playing the games probably are miserable too.
Yes, because you're transferring that misery to the game, through the game to the person. There's an energy that you put into the things that you care and you love and that you're devoted about, and that energy transfers to the end user.
100% agree. So now let's move into your Riot story, because I think that's the meat of this whole conversation, because a lot of people know you as the executive producer of Arcane, which is basically one of the masterpieces, and I believe that creative energy that we've been talking about has been transferred to a lot of people just by watching that. I told you this, earlier when we first met, that I felt like it was amazing, not just because of its story and its plot and because it was related to League of Legends, but also the choice of art in which, for me personally, growing up in Japan, understanding how anime looked like from before to today, there's a very a clear sense of visual identity when you watch a Japanese made anime, right? Versus, Western animated, cartoons, or even other form of animated, like movies and series, right? Now looking into Arcane, like I think what was really unique about that was the art. What was the story behind that? And but even before that, how did you get to like Riot? Like what happened? You got into Riot. We talk about that story first.
Yeah. I was playing a lot of League of Legends, and it was my favorite game. And I ended up meeting the CEO at the time, Brandon Beck, and we became fast friends. And he said, "Hey, you should come join Riot." And eventually, I ended up leaving Electronic Arts. I was executive there and joining Riot, and it was like a blast. It was a startup, but it was League was like starting to gain a lot of momentum. Like season 1 of esports just happened. It was like a bunch of season 1 is like the esports for League.
I was part of that.
Yeah.
I was part for Southeast Asia. I was a representative for the Philippines.
That's amazing. What a great connection. And the finals was in like folding chairs and all. It was really awesome. And I ended up becoming like product director of League. And I ran all the content. I worked on 42 champions. Like
42 champions. You were part of developing 42 champions.
Yeah. It was really amazing.
What was your favorite?
Oh, my favorite champion is actually not a champion I worked on.
Yeah, but the one you work on. What was your favorite in the one that you worked on?
Jinx and Vi were obviously like hold deep spots in my heart. Lucian definitely I loved. I think my favorite champion that I got to touch had to be, it had to be Lucian Thresh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thresh.
I really loved it. It's a really funny story about Thresh too. Like I have a friend, his name is Dennis Fong, and he was like one of the first esports guys. Like he actually is in the world Hall of Fame for esports.
Yeah, for sure he wasn't happy about the lantern.
Well, the thing is, his name is Dennis Fong, and his handle is Thresh, and he was famous for winning, I think like a Ferrari or something, like playing esports.
Okay.
This is like back in it. This is before
Okay.
esports before esports. And remember, I called him up, emailed him, and we said, hey, we really want to name this champion Thresh, and he was like very kind, and he allowed us to do it. Yeah.
Thresh was the one with the lantern where you can like jump in, right? Like I remember when that was introduced, like like technically had flash for all of his teammates. So that was really cool.
Exactly, yeah. And so during my time on League, it was amazing because we really revamped the art, and it just took the game to like a very modern, like the art, like the team grew from 83 people to around 400 people during that time, and I got to go all over the world. Like weirdly, I got to launch League of Legends in Vietnam out of my hometown that I left, Da Nang. It was like purely an accident. It wasn't like I wasn't like going, like it was set up that way.
And League of Legends is actually the biggest in Vietnam here in Southeast Asia.
It's huge, yeah. It's huge in Vietnam, and it was amazing to watch because it was amazing for me because somehow the universe like again circled around in the same way where I'm back in my home country, where where my parents left with me, on a boat it was a resort town back then, like a very small village, like a fishing village, and now it's like a resort. Wow. Yeah. So what a mind bender for me.
So from a product director.
Yeah, the time on League is amazing, and during that time too, we really blew out esports. I worked closely with a guy named Dustin Beck, who was running. He was a commissioner for League of Legends esports, and so really got to see the early days of esports. Like really talking about early. Like there were a couple of fun stories. Like we were going into season 2. We were going into the Galen Center. And then eventually the Staples Center, and all the people in the Staples Centers, they were like laughing at us. They were like, "There's no way people are gonna come to see a bunch of kids play
video games."
Yeah, and it sold out faster than any event that year.
Yes,
it was bananas. Yeah, it was really cool to see. And then Taiwan won that year, right?
IP Assassins.
But we got to go all over the world. Like really broke Imagine Dragons into Korea, like in 2014. That was a big highlight. They weren't big in Asia, and now they're huge in Asia. Became very close to the Imagine Dragon guys, like Dan Reynolds and the crew over there. And then 2018, 2018 we did KDA. That was awesome. Yeah.
So you were part of the development of KDA also.
Yeah. You know, I have a bunch of platinum albums like for my music, doing music at Riot, which is very strange, like for Warrior.
So you wrote some of the music in
I was a
AD.
producer.
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
And I worked closely with obviously some very talented songwriters and whatnot. And then another highlight was flying the AR Dragon into Bird's Nest
in Korea.
That was in Beijing.
In Beijing, in Beijing.
Yeah, and it was like trending on Chinese Twitter, and no, the time at Riot was so magical. I ran creative and franchise and oversaw a bunch of R&D, so tons of different games that came out of that. I just touched a lot of parts of Riot, and I hold such a deep respect for that company and what they've done.
Same for me. I think like these are the things that, you know, like a lot of the viewers would probably want to ask you. So let me ask you this, right? Like, obviously you came from game development to being able to contribute to, you know, like in-game related materials, to eventually being part of the esports journey of Riot. From your perspective, how important was the esports aspect to the growth of Riot or League of Legends as a game?
I think is massively important. You know, it made League hyper relevant, and you know, there's different players who play in different tiers, and the esports tier really is the aspirational tier.
Yes.
You know, I'll never become like pro esports guy, but I can appreciate what Faker is doing. I can appreciate you know, all these pro gamers and what they're doing. You know, it also like created like probably what I would describe as one of the best kinds of marketing content. You know, marketing can be an ad, marketing can be a billboard, but when marketing is something like esports, like true real content, or if marketing is like Arcane, it becomes just content on its own.
Yes.
It actually is way more value because it's not inauthentic. It's not trying to sell you something. It's just is. And to me, like when something just is, it really takes on a life of its own.
Now here's my question, right? Like, to come from a game that's a free-to-play model, utilizing esports and grew it into what it is today in terms of League of Legends, right? Like, where is the headspace at in terms of thinking about, is esports a cost center, or can it be a sustainable, you know, like business unit on its own? Like, at least where's your headspace in that? Just because we've known, you know, like in the past months that, you know, like the esports bubble has popped is what a lot of people are saying, and, you know, like from a third party organizer, from a team perspective, you know, like we have different takes on the matter. But from you who came from the publishing side, like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I have so many friends in it. My take is that by the way, just from a macro perspective, all things that are new will always become a bubble, and when it pops, it builds itself up again. So you see this over and over, like, you know, even the internet, right?
Yes.
Like back in '99, like it was a massive bubble, and then it built into like some of the largest companies in the world. And so the reason why it always starts this way because
the bubble also teaches you a lot.
Exactly, and people are so hyped, and people want to go in 10,000 directions, right? AI right now is like a crazy bubble, right?
Yes.
Like Nvidia's at like $3 trillion. And so you see all people trying a lot of different things, and lots of investment will come in, and then it will wash out all the people who are there for the wrong reasons.
That's how you see it.
You understand?
It's a filter.
It's a filter. And you saw this with blockchain too, by the way. Tons of people came in, and it's going to wash out all those people who are like not really authentic or sincere. I call them phonies, you know?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of phony people out there. And grifters. And so esports, I think, has gone through very similar things. I believe it's here to stay. But it's going to stay in different kinds of forms. Right?
Yes.
And different people are trying different things, right? Valve has done esports in a different way. Riot's done esports in a different way. ESL's done esports in a different way. The Saudis are doing esports in a different way. And so to me, like, somebody's going to figure it out because people are very, very willing to watch. And people just like competition. We know sports is a thing that exists, and people love sports. Like, people love watching golf, people love watching basketball, like everything in between, right? And esports, I think, is just another one of these things. You know, I know esports is in the Asia Games already. It'll likely be in the Olympics at some point.
Yes.
You know? It's being legitimized every year, you know? And I think young people growing up, they're more and more putting their time and attention on this. Yes. And so at some point, other games will show up, whatnot. And so my take is it a cost center? I think it's all of the above. It really is. And at the end of the day, I think I think everybody's gonna approach it in a different way, and it's all okay. You know, like I don't. There's no right or wrong. It's just people are gonna try what they want to try,
and then eventually one will disrupt, and that can be the free to play model of esports eventually.
Exactly, yeah, like that, exactly. And you're totally right, you know. And what I like about it, you know, I think at Riot, it was always there was always like a little bit of a tension, like should we be making money or how do we do this, you know? And so there's always like trying to figure that out. But I think Riot's done a fantastic job really pushing it forward. Like really Riot was instrumental to bring esports to the West. You know, obviously in Korea, StarCraft and whatnot, it's always big, but right now I think League of Legends in China for esports, obviously League in Korea, but League in the West is you know, I mean League in the West is not as big as League in China and Korea, but I really give Riot a lot of credit for really making it a thing in the West. And Valorant esports is huge too now.
Yes,
right?
it's coming up.
Yeah, it's coming up. And so I think people are going to try different things. People are going to figure it out. There's a lot of smart people working on it. And so it's not for lack of trying and lack of care. And somebody's going to figure it out.
Yeah, for me, like, I've always seen the brilliance of Riot when it comes to League of Legends and the way they have created an infrastructure that is in esports that supports the marketing of the game and the retention of the players in the game. And to add to that, you know, like creating multiple IPs around music, you know, like movies, and other things that puts out the awareness more and just promotes the game generally.
And it's real content.
Yes.
It's not like the music thing. I'll put a little bit. We talked about Veranda a little bit. Hey, Veranda. Yeah. You know, back in 2013 or 14, I remember Brandon was so excited. He's the CEO. He called me in his office and he's like, I really want to make Riot known for music, which is like a very strange thing to do. Like how many video games are known for music? You know, I grew up playing Final Fantasy and whatnot, so I knew the music, and Nintendo has always been good at music. But for a company to be known for music is like actually a very interesting thing. And so in that meeting, I met Veranda and Toa, who and then they ended up being a part of a group we called creative development. I was head of creative development, and Veranda and Toa headed Riot music group. And so there was a gentleman named Christian Link who was one of the composers back then. He led the composition team. He ended up becoming the showrunner for Arcane, and we'll talk about Arcane at some point. But what's amazing about it was if you look back, and now Riot's really known for music. Like literally, like the albums have done so well. KDA, Giants, every single Worlds had great music. Every single there's Arcane had like a sick soundtrack with Sting, and so the intention that was put out to the world was just like, we're gonna make a game company known for its music, was in that moment in 2012, 2013 became now like one of the best things that happened for Riot.
For sure.
There's like these memes which is like Riot's a great music company trying to become a game company.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, there were just a lot of like things that favored Riot in terms of like what they did, but obviously that wasn't because of luck. That was because of the intention that, you know, like they had internally in the company. I wasn't there, but the point is, like, from an outsider's perspective, the way I see it is Riot is kind of like a living organism of an entertainment in the entertainment space, right? It's a living organism on its own, which utilizes League of Legends initially with esports and all of the other facets that are around it. But for me, as an esports person, right, what really shocked me was for them to be able to think, to expand into the different genres that are relevant in esports, such as FPS. You have, you know, your card games, and then they're now looking into the other genres and copy pasting that into multiple genres, which can then be eventually like a full ecosystem of esports titles and game titles that could branch out into other entertainment IPs such as music games and movies and everything else, right? So it then becomes kind of like a Disney, some sort of like a company where Star Wars and all of the other, you know, like IPs under it are becoming living organisms of its own that are part of like a huge living organism. So
Yeah.
so I feel like those who think of companies that same way versus it's just X amount of cells in a sheet is
Yeah.
really going to innovate a lot of things. So with that being said, right, let's talk about Arcane. So how did you get to, like produce Arcane? How did that
Yeah.
came to be?
Yeah, in 2014, Christian, Link, and Alex. Christian was I worked with Christian on almost every single piece of music at Riot for like 10 years, and Alex, who was one of our writers, came and they're like, "Hey, we want to make a TV show," and I was like, "Wow, we've never made a TV show before." Very ambitious.
But you wouldn't be surprised because you also heard that you wanted to do music and they executed it, right?
Exactly, yeah. And there was a studio in Paris called Fortiche, and we worked with them on a bunch of stuff. We worked with them on the first thing we worked with them was we actually found them. They made this thing called Le Limousine, this short animation that they put on like YouTube, and we're like, this is like such a unique style, we've never seen anything like it, and so Christian contacted them and built out the first music video for Riot called Get Jinx, and that video now has something like, I think only in the West, not including China, has something like 500 million views. It's like, it was a very popular song, and that video, you can kind of see the initial style for
the animation.
For Arcane, yeah. And so so the team, at that point, Fortiche, there were like 3 directors, and then they would hire out people to come in and help. Christian started to R&D with them, and so I oversaw that with as head of the product group, and I was always checking in to see how he's doing. And what's unique about Arcane was a group that was first-time producers, first-time writers, first-time showrunners, first-time like animators. Like, at the end of the day, Arcane was 6 hours of theatrical animation. And if you think about like a traditional Disney movie, it's 1.5 hours. And the fact that there were so many people like who told us that this couldn't be done, like traditional animation studios couldn't do this, and so the crew had to really reinvent the wheel in terms of how they're going to do it. And what's amazing is that the studio Fortiche, they obviously did music videos for us. They've never done a big show, but they were able to build a crew to do a brand new style, which means you have to really teach new animators to come in to do that same style, right? It doesn't look like Disney or anime or whatnot, and do it at that quality, like theatrical quality. It's equivalent to 3 movies,
Yeah, it's
like,
amazing. It's amazing. I feel like it can be a Game of Thrones kind of like an IP or like a Star Wars kind of IP, just because the whole realm of League of Legends is huge, and I think it was a very unique way of showing the visuals of the game differently, and I think like that's why it resonated to a lot of people. I mean, I think being able to have play the game is just an additional, like even if you didn't play the game, you would have loved it. And it also came out at the perfect time, when everybody was at home.
No, it was great. And honestly, like just to give people like the context, there was a lot of things about the show that was counterintuitive. Number 1 was new animation style. Number 2 was mature. The show was TV14.
Yes.
And a lot of people are like, there's very few animation that's TV14 that actually broke out.
Yes.
Right? It's usually like younger, like Disney stuff, or much like maybe like super R-rated or something like
you don't even know one, right? It didn't come out.
I'm thinking like Ninja Scroll or something, so both of those. It also is based on a video game IP, which is like, to put it in context, at that point there were 200 video game adaptations, and only I think 4 or 5 were not rotten. It was like Pokemon Detective and
actually I'm very, very surprised with that, in my opinion, because as a gamer, having had played multiple games and have followed the lores of a lot of games, the lores actually felt really good and are still good in my head when I played the game.
Yeah.
But when it's put on a screen in a movie theater, for some reason, everything fails. I don't know. I mean, not everything fails, but it doesn't look as good. I was wondering at times, is the experience different because I'm not the character? Or is it just difficult to portray it in 1 hour or so?
It's a great question. Yeah, it's all of those things. And I'll enumerate a few of the reasons. One is video games tend to be really long. Like you're talking about 60 to 100
yes,
hours.
Actually.
League of Legends is 5,000 hours, 6,000 hours. People can play forever, right? And so how do you encapsulate that in like a
2 hour max,
2 hours,
3 hours max,
3 hours, or a series that's 6 or 7 hours? One, that's really hard. So number two is that typically in a game, you come into it fully formed. Like when you're Master Chief, you come into it like Master Chief. There's no like Master Chief was a young kid to become Master Chief. There's no like
there's no A to Z.
Yeah, there's no.
You meet the final product.
Yeah, you're
at a certain age and a certain life.
Laura Croft is Laura Croft. She's badass at the beginning. Like she doesn't like. There's no
character development of some sort.
Exactly. It doesn't need it.
It's a developed character already, right?
Exactly. And number three is, it's way more fun. This is Zack Snyder actually gave me this, and I thought it was brilliant because he said it's way more fun to shoot paintball than to watch someone shoot paintball. And it's really insightful comment, right? Because if you're playing World of Warcraft and you're running a 40-person raid or 25-person raid, that's way more fun than watching someone raid, right?
Yeah.
Although obviously streaming is really popular, but it's just the truth.
Yes.
And so the stories need to be deeply emotional, and so much of games are not subtext. Almost all games are sort of over the top exposition. Like you see what you see.
Yeah.
But stories are about what you don't see.
like,
Stories are about what's inside, right? Like what is going on with the character inside that they're not saying, but everybody can read. That's the magic.
You know what I realized? Like, actually, you're on point in all of the things that you mentioned. But on top of that, from a literature perspective, you're always limited to first person, second person, third person, right? But if you think about games, what is it?
Yeah.
Is it first person on a very controllable manner? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In a way, like literature in a way limits you to a certain interpretation and telling of a story versus you are in it, playing it, has a control on its decisions. Like, it's just a totally different experience.
Yeah. No, during that time, I took the equivalent. Arcane took about 6 or 7 years. I took the equivalent of
6-7 years to make.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because building the studio, writing, like it's a lot of work, right? But I took the equivalent of 3 MFAs, like Master of Fine Arts. Like I really, really was devoted to learning story, and I had this argument with my professor, and my professor, he said something that was fascinating to me. He said, and we had an argument about art. What is art, right? And he said, art requires you to quiet the mind. Like it requires, like if you're watching something, a play or listening to music, your mind goes to a very quiet place, and then you can then receive the information. But games are you're in it, you're in the moment, you're interactive. So can that be considered art? So we had this like really long, very interesting debate, and it's like, how do you get to a place where you're in it, you're in the experience, but also feeling some deep message? Because when you're in the moment, oftentimes your brain is taking over. So it goes back to that question about flow. How are you in the moment where you're in flow but not thinking? And if you think about, like, there's a couple of games that I think really reached in terms of that form. Like, I thought Journey from Genova Chen and that game company was a really good game that did that. I also thought a game like Bioshock. Bioshock was the first game where I thought it did something that neither film nor books nor any other medium could have done other than games.
Final Fantasy for me, because I'm a Final Fantasy. That was my
I grew up
age
playing
group.
all Final Fantasy.
Yeah, so that was my.
Final Fantasy
7, in my opinion, was
Final
probably
Fantasy
that.
7, right? I grew up playing Final Fantasy 3, and there was a scene, the orchestra scene. Your audience may be too young for this, but during that scene, there was like this octopus in an orchestra. It was the first time I cried in a game. It was like really amazing, like so it's really amazing to watch all these mediums sort of evolve, and being a part of like the tapestry of that, just even a little bit for me has been magical.
That's amazing. Like, just to just have a few. I just have a few questions about Arcane, and then we're gonna move on to like your new project, right?
Yeah.
First question: did you ever expect? So, in terms of expectation and reality, was the reality after launching it higher than your expectation?
You know what? There was a moment during the development where all of us who were working on it day to day turned to each other and realized that this was going to be really, really good. We thought for our players, like League of Legends, it would be like 10 out of 10. And we thought for gamers, it would be like 9 out of 10. And then we thought for audiences outside of them would be 8 out of 10. But it ended up being like, I think it's the highest rated show on Netflix today.
Yes.
And so it was it ended up it ended up way surpassing all of our expectations, I would say. And for me personally, I look at things that we end up devoting ourselves to, whether like in any kind of art, you kind of disappear and it's just the art, like the sort of persona, it just becomes that thing that you put your energy into. Like what you said earlier, it's really like there was so much love and care put into it, and come hell or high water, it was going to have to be the expression of that collective, and the animation studio, those guys, like, they poured their hearts into it.
For sure.
It was like bananas, like the way they thought about the world and the way they worked. And so I give a lot of credit to, obviously, the showrunners like Christian and Alex, but the animation studio, Fortige, and all the people along the way, like producers, like the music, the guys who composed the music. Like, one thing that was amazing is that most, if not all, of that music was written internally, and then some of the greatest musicians, like a Sting, came and he crushed it so hard, man.
Yeah. Here's my other question. Like, this is probably like my last question, right? Like, not a lot of people see that creating something like that requires 7 years to make, right? Like, I didn't even know that. So, for a 6 hour of an animation to be created and developed for 7 years, because we're living in a world where people just love short form content and attention spans are getting really lower. So not a lot of people understand the importance of a very resilient grind. 7 years is a long time, right? Especially in this day and age. In the middle of that whole, like 7-year run, was there a point where you felt like, is this even worth it? Because you go into like the 3rd year, 4th year, 5th year, like, and it's not out yet. It's because it's different, right? Like, when you're creating something that you put out there today, tomorrow, or 3 months from now, you get to see the output and the feedback and everything as quick, versus you're pouring in so much effort for the longest time and you don't even know what's gonna happen after. What was that feeling? Was there a doubt in the middle of it?
I managed a lot of creative people, and undoubtedly along the way there's always what I call the dark night of the soul. And the dark night of the soul is when you're like, this is not worth it, why am I doing this? Turn back. I mentioned earlier that I
did you feel that yourself?
You know what, I felt, what's interesting, I did feel it a few times, but I'm one of those people that once I get fully devoted to something, it is like a religion. It's like full devotion, but the world will tell you otherwise. Like when you're doing something that a lot of people thought we were wrong for doing TV-14, like the mature stuff. A lot of people thought the animation style is not gonna be like mass marketed. A lot of people thought like they thought a bunch of the world, somehow the world will come at you and they'll tell you like what you're doing is the wrong thing. You should do the other thing. Like go in this direction, that direction. Everything is wrong. And this is where your mind plays tricks on you. This is why I talk about the mind a lot, which is like the mind would be like, maybe they're right. Maybe you're like maybe you and the entire team, you guys are phonies. You guys are just doing this for the wrong reason. Like, but the heart always tells you the truth, you know? And the heart was like, just keep going. Don't like, and I remember there was a moment, maybe inside baseball, but I won't name who it is. I won't name like the position, but high up. And they said, you're really putting all your eggs into this Arcane thing.
Yes, it's 7 years. It's a long time. It's 4 years. It's 3 years more than your high school years.
And they said, you know, are you willing to bet everything on it? Are you willing to you know, essentially, are you willing to bet everything? I said, if it doesn't work, you can fire me. I remember saying that, and I think it was shocking to them. And you know, I think this idea of, it's called the narrow path, which is a philosophical thing, which is, in the West they call it burn all the boats. You know, like entrepreneurs do this, which is like, so when the sort of early people who went to America, they came to America, like they burnt the boats so that they can never go back. So they have to survive. The winners, whatever it is, the hunger,
it's basically the rope in the Batman series, right? Like if you have no rope,
exactly,
then
there's
you'll
only
jump.
One way.
There's only one way, right?
There's only one. And I think that's the path of the devotion. You know, it's a very narrow path, and lean one way, you'll fall off the cliff. Lean another way, you'll fall off the cliff. And so you walk that very tight rope, and you burn the boats. And so I was like, look, you can fire me if it doesn't work, and we're gonna go all the way. Like at this point, there's no turning back.
And then you're vindicated. You know, like those were 7 years of your life, and you know, like just hearing from you from start to finish up until like the Arcane story. Before we get to your next project, right? Like I think I've learned so much, and thank you so much. Like basically for the time and the honesty and being able to share like all of those things. I think I've never really met anyone who is as positive, who has so much self-awareness and is very articulate in the way you think about in the way one think about things. And I really kind of learned a lot from you, honestly, like in this whole podcast. But for me, outside of the vindication that you had after Arcane, what's really interesting for me is you're taking on new challenges still, right? I mean, it seems like you've went through a lot, obviously went through so much fire and went out shining, and now you're entering into Web3, right? And Creta is basically one of your companies now in Web3. One thing that I want to ask to you is, with all of the success that you have, there is always a chance of failure in any new thing that you enter into, right? So why are you doing it? Why are you doing it?
I actually don't even think of Creta as a Web3 thing. I just think of the future as being, and I'll tell you really quickly the story. You know, after I left Riot, I raised a couple of funds, and I actually invested in a bunch of gaming, AI, Web3. Like I've done a bunch of work in this space and seen a lot of what's out there, what's happening. And for me, blockchain is an incredible technology. You know, like decentralizing and true ownership is actually a really positive thing for players. I always thought that. This has always been the thesis, you know. And the ability to build fan communities, you know. And like anything else, there was like this bubble. There was all these people came in and did all this stuff. Yeah, right? That actually gave it a really not a negative connotation in a way. And that's always going to be the case. You see this with everything in every bubble. This happens. So for me, when I was building my next thing, I was building this incubator, and the incubator was gaming, media, and IP. And I was building these really unique and amazing products, and I had some great backers. And for me, I was looking for a future-proof solution, because you know the gaming industry's changed a lot.
Yes.
And for me, one thing that you'll realize about me is I don't like competition. I like doing things where no one's if everybody's going this way, I'm going the other. You know, and this happened like all throughout my career in every single field that I'm in, every single thing I've done, like whether it's the music stuff at Riot whether it's like.
I mean, you go against the competition in a way, but eventually you beat everyone.
Because
after you know.
Because at the end of the day, it's just you versus you, right? It's just you competing against yourself when you're not going into like crowded spaces. So I really like the 0 to 1 Peter Thiel. I like the blue ocean areas because because I like defining like my own frame. To me, if you're playing in competition, you're playing a game of inches.
Yes.
It's constantly a game of inches, and the amount of resources and energy you put into it is just insane. You know, let other people do that. Let the big players do that. You know, and so I was looking for a way to future-proof my content. I was like, well, I think Web3 solutions, blockchain solutions, crypto solutions are going to be something that will be good for players. But it should not be the reason why people are into a space, right? Like all this like Web3 gaming, there's no Web2, there's no Web3, it's just gaming.
Yes.
It should just be gaming, and whatever's underneath is underneath. Like when I watch a movie, I'm not determining what camera is being used. I don't fucking care. Sorry about my English. I just cussed on camera. But you know what I mean? Or like if somebody's like playing music, I'm not like, what guitar are they using? I don't care. It's great music. It's great
That's
music.
actually very well put. You know, like at the end of the day, technology is technology, and whatever made the game, made the game.
Exactly.
But if it allows you to provide the gamers better experiences, then why not, right?
And
like,
it should be invisible. Like I don't like, so for video games, when I play like a cool game and they have cool physics engine, I'm not asking which physics engine. I'm not asking which, you know. I just want to have a great experience. And I think Web3 in the last generation, you saw a lot of people are like, this is a Web3 game.
Yes.
Or this is like and I'm like, who cares? Is it a fun game? Like,
Yeah.
I don't care if it's a Web3 game.
100% agree with you. So, like, the way I see it is you've done a lot of things and disrupted, you know, like, a lot of things as well by really providing as much of an effort and focus on the thing that you're working on, right? And I think your history and your credentials already say that, right? My question is, in terms of the vision of Creta, what do you see in it?
Yeah, so Creta at the end of the day is an ecosystem. And so one of the biggest challenges with building anything new is that it requires a lot of an ecosystem requires a lot of pieces, right?
Yes.
So Creta is really 4 pieces. It's and by the way, I'm a partner to them because I wanted to partner with them because I haven't found a group that was doing all these things at this level. So Creta is one part social media. So think Discord, streaming, Twitch,
Steam.
all that. Steam, all combined. There's one part game sort of EXE, which is like lobby games all connected. One part game creation tool. So think like a high-end Roblox, and one part the social media is like they call it Super Club, and then the last part obviously like the games that they're making. Like these guys are actually like, when I met them I was like blown away because the founder, Mr. Lee, Seng Lee, he was like the godfather of Korean game industry. He started making games when he was like 14. He was one of the first free-to-play guys. Like he made free-to-play. One of the first guys who made free-to-play. One of the first guys who made esports games in Korea. He ran he was like a executive and game maker at NCSoft, and so he built games like Lineage and Ion and all these big MMOs. So these guys are MMO guys. And then Ray, who's the other co-founder, he was one of the early guys in Japan. He made his first game 40 years ago in '84. Like this is like literally when I came from the States. So these guys are like legit game veterans. And then other partners are like Okamoto-san, who made like Street Fighter 2, Resident Evil, Monster Strike, Monster Hunter, Final Fight, like Devil May Cry. Like these are really legit game makers. So for them, this endeavor is not a Web3 endeavor.
It's a game.
It's just they're just making games. It's just enabling technology, and that's why I was like excited. I was like, wow, of course I want to future-proof whatever I'm doing, and I really believe in this idea of true ownership. Because to put it in perspective a little bit, like I'll use this example, which is, you know, a lot of people ask like, what do you mean true ownership? I'm like, okay, so say you own your a car, like you have like a BMW. You can sell your car, you can drive it as an Uber, you can lend somebody your car
because you have the rights for it.
You can do anything you want. It's your car. BMW has no say over what you want to do to your car. You can soup it up, you can modify it, but that's not true in games.
Yes.
So when you
Because
buy
the games still own it.
yes, and if the service goes away, it goes away.
Yes.
But this gets solved by the blockchain.
Yeah, and imagine a lot of people have poured in so much hours in certain games, and then eventually, like, those games are gone.
Tell me about it. I've done that.
Yeah, it happened to a lot of people, like to a lot of us, right? So I feel like that really solves a lot of things.
Yeah. So that's what I'm excited about, and it also allows for a lot of other things that's happening right now in the game industry that I think people are unaware of. So for example, in many of these games, you can do trading. You know, like games like Dota, games like Counter-Strike, Lineage. You can do in-game.
They're like marketplaces, basically.
There's a marketplace, but the marketplace is largely unregulated, sort of like lots of fraud. But the amount of liquidity is crazy.
Yes.
Literally, like oftentimes many multiples of the actual revenue per year in game, but because it's not on a blockchain, it's not tracked.
Yes.
It's all over the place. Like you send me your item, I'll send you some Venmo. You know, like it's just nuts. This solves a lot of that. So this ecosystem allows you to connect all those dots. It's invisible. It has no wallet. It should just work like in-game currency or a bank account.
I 100% agree. Like like I'm never a tech person nor a tech CEO. But I believe that I'm more of an entertainment, like space type of CEO. But when I technically like look into the history of games and the way it has developed, the way I see Web3 personally, I mean, I haven't been really vocal about this, but I see it as a potential next internet, right? When internet came into play into the gaming space, it has technically democratized anyone to play with anyone. Exactly, right? Yeah. So obviously, as that happened, there are a lot of needs when it comes to more advancements in technology, such as game ownership, like being able to have a certain chain in terms of, like finance, like fintech, and being able to use fiat into it and then purchasing it and all that. Plus the fact that it will just open up a lot of things for game developers like on your side, right? So for me, generally, like this technology, similar to the internet, will just change gaming as we know it. And for that reason, I'm excited. Like, because for me, like I've seen it, right? People initially didn't want this, and then eventually they'll see what it can do, and then they'll want it. You'll never know.
I would only do it if I believe that it added more value to the ultimate player. Because at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're building player trust. Like everything that you're doing is building player trust. And to the point that you're saying around it, I really believe in like you said, the democratization of the internet. Like I really believe in the future because production in gaming has changed a lot. I believe in the next few years you're gonna see teams of 1 to 2 people, maybe teams of 10 people
that are developing games already
make billion-dollar games. Very, very
because of the technology that's available to them now. The tools are different.
Engines, you have like AI, you have blockchain, like all these things are enabling factors, and you're kind of seeing it already this year. Like the teams that made like Lethal Company, Bit Battle, Power World, these are small teams, and they're building massive games that people are like losing their minds over. Yeah. And so imagine what's going to happen in the next few years when AI is already like really supercharged.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same way I think about it, right? Like at the end of the day, technology is a tool and a platform, and it's a matter of how do we weaponize it in our favor, right? Yes. And that's what I'm really excited about for the future of gaming. I guess like I want to end with this story before I get to my final question to you, where one of my like older investors in Tier 1 Entertainment, he has been in the VC space for like 30 plus years already here in this part of the world, but he actually like he grew up in LA and basically is now living in Malaysia. And I asked him, what was your greatest investment? Like what's the most interesting investment that you made? And basically he told me that, like I invested in this company where if you get into an accident, the people who will contact you, or like one important person in your life, will know where you are. Just because before, when people had accidents and like there was this person that you would call, like they wouldn't know where you are, and like if you're already like blurry and whatnot, then how can you say or even tell where you were, right? And he invested in that, and that came out to be the GPS.
That's amazing.
Yeah, right. So I'm like, oh God, like you invested in the GPS, right? And then during that night of like drinking and talking, he was like, like if it wasn't for that, you wouldn't have Grab, Uber, you wouldn't have Google Maps or Waze. So the point is like the GPS as a technology was such an innovator to a lot of things, just because being able to precisely understand one's location initially was just to figure out where the person was. But today we're using it for, like tracking a lot of things, being able to bring in a lot of things. And that's why Web3 could be something else in the next 3 to 5 years. And that's what I'm really excited about.
Exactly.
Yes.
Pokemon Go is a benefactor of it.
Yeah, that's true. So one last question, and this is also like my biggest question out of everything after a podcast is, if there was a turning point in your life, knowing that you are how successful you are today or where you are today, what do you think was your turning point?
Oh, that's a great question. Never thought of it. I feel like I've
taking neuroscience, was that it?
I feel like I've lived five lives now at this point. And I'll enumerate some of the turning points. My parents bringing me to the U.S.
Of course.
Obviously, I could have been a rice farmer or dead, right? No. So that's one. Number two was meeting the guy in university that ended up getting me into the game industry.
The pitch.
I could have gone doctor route or now gaming route. Being kind of like messed over by my company changing my game from free to play to box product at the last minute, which pushed me to go and search for other things, and then meeting Brandon at Riot. And then so that Riot journey was so insane. And then after that, a big turning point was going on a deep spiritual path, after Riot. I was always oscillating, going from conscious to unconscious, asleep to awakened state. But afterwards, I did everything from I climbed Kilimanjaro, I slept in the King's Chamber, I met tons of teachers. I really went to the ends of the earth, to the Himalayas, and just had this profound awakening of my consciousness in a deep way, which allowed me to have a lot of clarity in terms of what I need to do and what I want to do for my next chapter. That's amazing. So last, any advice to anyone out there who's dreaming to chase their dream? Yeah. It sounds so silly to say follow your heart, but I really mean it. You're ask yourself whenever you have thoughts about what you want to do, where those thoughts come from, and then get rid of those thoughts. And don't think. Yeah, don't think. Don't think. Thinking is only to move mountains, but somehow what was built, I describe as what was built to be a servant, your mind, became the world's master, and so reverse it, And one of my teachers, a great friend of mine, he had a great aphorism. He said, wisdom is the marriage between the heart and the mind. And I love that idea because once you unlock that, everything is possible. You become very much again, the woman who picked up the car. It just becomes, all the opportunities, all the possibilities become real. Super cool. So again, this has been a podcast between Thomas and me. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I did. So that's it, and see you in the next vlog. Cheers.